Gary's a psychiatrist, founder and director of the Billion Person Institute, the Billion Mind Institute, a previous policy source on health-related policy for the Commissioner of New York City. He holds a appointment at Harvard University's Chan School of Public Health and a lot of other things. He's headed for a virtual keynote at the COPS 26 program later today. Gary, we're glad to have you. Well, let's get started. We're going to have 30 minutes available for Gary as planned, and depending where we are at that point, perhaps take a question or two as well. Welcome, Gary Belkin.
Great, thanks, Bob. Thanks, everyone. It's great to see mental health professionals coming together on this issue. And Mark, I really appreciate your work. I was struck by your one slide around what you could do in terms of to simplify, localize, and build community, and think of the systems that promote that. It's a good handoff to me because I've been thinking about how our profession can simplify, localize, and community build its work in the face of these challenges that you described, which are both personal and hugely social in terms of the damage psychologically. Bob asked us to answer a couple of questions, reflections, personal, how we came to this personally. To his first question, my emotions generally run from grief and anger. I have not gotten to hope, and I don't think David Orr described hope in that clip. I think what he described was love, commitment, a sense of vigilance, and the result of being in relationships that he cared about. And that, I think, is what we as a community know a lot about: how to build those things, how to nurse those things, and how to support those things so people can get through this, but also so that people can act on this, because they need those elements to work. And so I've sort of been calling that kind of complex of stuff the foundations for the ability to cope and for the ability to act together as the social climate. And we have to worry about the social climate. And I believe very strongly that we, and when I say we, the mental health profession, and what we know and our knowledge, our tools and our position, our credibility, need to assume that leadership. And whatever we thought our careers were like, whatever the confines were of offices and billing hours, we have to rethink and be more ambitious about what our work looks like. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And a confession: I came to psychiatry. I chose psychiatry because I really felt that it was the things that worried about, things that it could do for people, were the linchpin for social change. And I was influenced by other psychiatrists such as Frantz Fanon, Fulton Earls, Mindy Fililove, who really saw the social as our business and as our inescapable driver of the pain that we took care of. And so we had to bridge those gaps, liberation psychology, just a whole set of work and knowledge that needs to be more broadly surfaced in terms of what we do. As Bob mentioned, I was mostly been a public health official. And when I was deputy health commissioner for New York City, I was feeling increasingly moved by having to do something about climate change. So that's me with the gray cap getting arrested as part of an Extinction Rebellion action. So I figured, what was I going to do for climate change? So I figured I'd throw my body into it. And we shut down 8th Avenue for several hours in New York City, which for any of you know that's a lot of traffic to get shut down. And I was trying to think of, well, what could I do more than throw my body at the problem? And I've told this story elsewhere. My 4-year-old son at the time, I was explaining I might be away because you go to jail for processing. You don't know how long that is. I don't know when I'd be back. So I was telling him I was going to a protest. What's a protest? It's a bunch of us who are going to really yell at people who we think are breaking the earth, and yell at them to stop doing that. And he asked me, so there are going to be bad guys there? I said, well, yeah, I guess there'll be bad guys there. We're going to try to reach the bad guys to hear us. And he said, okay, so I guess you'll need my magic wand. I'm sorry. So he ran to get this stick. It was about this big, and I had it with me and kept it. And I'm remembering the story. I mean, I do tell from time to time, but I was remembering it last night because I took this now 6-year-old to get his first vaccination. And I remember the story because I was thinking, well, maybe this is as close as I will get to giving him a magic wand to protect him, to have a magic wand that can protect him. But then, I thought about it, that, that vaccine is not a magic wand. It is the result of intention, and of knowledge, and of purpose, and of investment, and of an ethos that we all matter, and of a purpose of care that we want to universalize. And our field knows a lot about how to build a regenerative, mutual, caring, other regarding relationships, but also, I think, societies. And we need to do that because the pressures of climate change, and Mark did a lot of the groundwork of how bad things are, so I'm going to do less of that. But only to emphasize the urgency aspect of this, not so much, for all of us to find our way to act and scream, but the urgency for us as a community, a mental health community, to get our act together to be part of this, to be part of this preparation of emotional resilience and readiness and collective work and breaching the fragmentation that we're now in socially. That's our work, and it's urgent because of this train barreling down on a social fabric that is completely unready to handle these challenges. Whether they're challenges of just coping, or just getting through without further killing each other, or whether it's the challenge of also mobilizing for action, and the two are related, and I'm going to get back to that in a second. But I never assume that an audience, gets all this, how deeply, wonky they are and all this stuff, 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees, and so forth. So I just leave this take home to you. This is from the UN Environmental Program report that was just issued before COP meetings started, showing where we're left in terms of all these national pledges to get to this 1.5 degree range, which is relatively good. Get into 2 degrees, that's where a lot of uncertainty happens, of unravelings, of sea level rise and drought exposure that just cascades into further emissions and kind of an escape potential where we're going to be in really big trouble in terms of many places for people literally to be able to live, drink, and eat, and not drown. And I just want you to pay attention to the steepness of these curves in terms of the pace of reduction in emissions that has to happen. Here is 2020, okay? So the inflection point, this deep dive into where we are now in terms of CO2 production to stay in the 1.5 degree range is a flight off a cliff. This is a steep change. And the Biden proposals that are being held up in Congress are all back-ended, calculations of if we do this, we get closer to this curve. And this is why a lot of people keep talking about the 2030, et cetera, because that's where the hard work is between now and 2030, is to get this deep, steep decline, so then we can level out. Carbon sits around forever. And so all the rapid work is up front. And every year that goes by, every month that goes by, these curves get steeper. And so we are likely, and here's the current policy scenario, is we're like at 3 degrees, closest 3 degrees centigrade. Best scenario of all these pledges really doing their job, and we're not there, is over 2 degrees. So we are really sitting more likely in this scenario right now, and how things look. And what that is going to do to us socially and emotionally is something our community really has to voice out loud as its own crisis, a social climate crisis, but also do stuff about it. And I think there's a ton we can do about it, but we're gonna have to change how we think about our work. So I sketched this out to help me think through things. There's this earth climate we keep talking about, which really needs a kind of regenerative ecology, carbon balance that keeps us in a habitable earth, and a biodiversity and a regenerative ecology that also preserves biodiversity. That is the natural mechanism and fuel for both the regenerative ecology and for life forms and the sustenance and food chains that we need. So we've been thinking about a lot of policies to get this kind of going for a habitable earth, but we are not going to be good handmaidens of this. We are not going to be the good change agents to succeed at this if we don't also worry about, what do we have to look like? What does our social climate have to look like? And so I've kind of summarized in my own mind as a virtuous cycle between commitments and capacity of real subjective well-being, emotional resilience, and those social strengths, and the ability to collectively act and problem solve, much as Mark said, at a local community level, to simplify the problem, to break down these issues of mitigation and adaptation, both prevention, but also response to the real damage that's coming, and to a lot of our communities more than others. So how do we get to this virtuous cycle of collective efficacy and action? And these somewhat mirror image each other, but we're not going to achieve the left if we don't achieve the right. And the mental health community, has a lot to say about, and we know a lot about how to get to the virtuous circle on the right. And one thing we need to do is relearn and reteach the population that mental health is not about this. And Bob, can you just nod yes or no? Do people see the arrow that I'm moving around? I'm moving around an arrow like I'm pointing on my screen. Do you see that? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we have told the world that what our community is about is caring for people down here. And we've arranged our work and our business models and our training pipelines to reinforce that. We work down here. But if we're going to be part of appreciating and realizing the fact that people need not to have a mental disorder or active symptoms of mental disorder, but the people need from us to have psychological resources and strengths to take on and endure the challenges of living on the planet now. And so our field of work is this whole curve, and serving it and shifting it to the right. And embedding in our work and the paradigms that that guide it is that population well-being and resilience and flourishing is a necessary cornerstone for all public policy. We have to walk that walk. That means that we have to work in many more places. And that curve, moving that curve, is really moving from a kind of strategy of defense, staying in a lower left point, to a kind of strategy to taking offense, to going on the offensive rather than sitting on the defensive. And going on the offensive means going to other places. So this is a sketch by Helen Berry, who some of you may know, who's a psychiatrist and worked on climate and mental health for a long time. And she did this paper where she looked at the cascade of events that happened between a climate impact like drought here on the left. And she and how all the sort of intermediary social changes and stresses on the environment, on people, that lead to depressive symptoms or suicide, anxiety symptoms, et cetera. And all these arrows are based on research literature-based correlations between one factor to the next arrow that it's connected to. And so you see this ecosystem of what leads to these sort of mental health outcomes. So, you know, drought to employment and financial constraints to household and family and spousal stress to uncertainty for the future, and, you know, and so forth. And so if we're going to really be there for the huge morbidity and mental and emotional damage and distress and trauma that's on the way, and that's already here, and in many parts of our country already just endemic, because climate catastrophes are endemic, wildfires, floods, et cetera. We not only have to build a capacity that we're used to, sitting in our offices waiting for people to come here, but if we want to live up to facing this morbidity, we have to go to all these places. We have to go upstream, and we have to spread out. We have to change the real estate and the reach of our work. And that's one area that when I was working in the health policy space, and when I was Deputy Health Commissioner in New York City, really tried to show how that might be possible, how to change the real estate for mental health work. And I learned it by unlearning my psychiatry, mostly in the global south. I worked in Haiti after the earthquake on the top left, sub-Saharan Africa with an effort called the Millennium Villages Project on the bottom left, both with organizations that worked on health. How do we deliver health in low resource settings? By relying on the people who live there, on skilling those people, learning from them what the problems were and what the kind of coping strategies were. And really make it the purpose of mental health professional partners to skill and support them. And that was part of an early field of global mental health that really created a deep evidence base that that's a smart way to do things. This table is a schematic of what we did in Haiti, where we took a WHO mental health care pathway, depression care pathway. We broke it out into very basic tasks. Do a screen, advise the person about their problems, educate about the illness, dose an antidepressant, very concrete tasks. And then we listed all the people in the communities who could do those tasks. There were community members, there were clergy, there were some general physicians, there were social workers, all these, you know, who could do these things. And we were able to, with no psychiatrists from the country, we were able to fill in the box, every box. In terms of who could do the work, and created a care pathway that way. And a real robust literature has arisen, and I believe you guys have access to my PowerPoints. This is a really good one-stop resource about this field of task shared work, a robust evidence base of a whole range of things that lay people can do for acute distress and symptoms, as well as for prevention and promotion work, more upstream work. And when I was in New York City, I developed an effort called ThriveNYC that put that learning from the global south to purpose and in a large urban space, where we developed a whole bunch of initiatives that in one way or another were about skill transfer to non-professionals, but with professionals being in some way a coaching and support partner. Each one of these dots, they're different colors because they each color describes a different kind of population. That was the focus. But the point is, I just want you to get this visual. Each one of these is not, this is not kind of an abstract graphic. These are geocoded locations of Thrive initiatives where work was happening, contacts were happening. And so each one of these, none of these are in a mental health clinic. All of these are in other spaces, schools, homeless shelters, job training programs, daycare centers, and where we're changing the real estate of the work through these task shared measures. And by doing that, we also brought in a whole lot of government. We brought in other sectors to also join in and be part of this work. So change the real estate of ownership and change the real estate of location and access and touch. So that it also occurred to me as I was thinking about leaving this work, that this kind of approach was necessary to live up to, to go upstream and live up to the scale of need that a collapsing environment is going to provoke and have to get support for, by really putting the support in the water. But it also is a way of starting to think about higher levels of ways that the mental health system and mental health providers are going to be needed now. Because there's the morbidity burden, but there's a larger project that goes with that curve that I said we have to shift, of being part of promoting well-being in general in the population, of enhancing other people's outcomes, of doing this kind of work intentionally, not just with the distress and relief of an individual person as the end in itself, but of what we know is being put to the purpose of being a means to larger social ends. And that's been a sort of conversation that has been starting to happen within our field in terms of how the things that we worried about, mental health morbidity, actually really relate to and are in fact largely driven by social factors that we don't control over, but that we can get closer to and advocate for and help design and execute. This is a diagram. This was from a paper in Lancet Psychiatry that tried to line up what we know as proximal social factors or environmental factors on mental and emotional morbidity, distress, suffering, and how those connect to sustainable development goals, which, as so many of you assumed are familiar with, but just to briefly summarize, this is a set of globally endorsed goals for sustainable development through a UN process that really seem to be the pillars, if we can meet those goals, for assembling all the working parts for an equitable, thriving human existence that is environmentally, that works within the confines of environmental sustainability. So a lot of it, around decarbonized ways of life. And so here's, and I assume you can read it yourself, but so as we as a profession think more about social determinants of mental health, what they do is they bring us towards looking at, okay, how are we part of these larger policies and purposes about poverty reduction and income security, about neighborhood collective efficacy and living conditions, about built environment impacts and planning, about access to education and particularly equitable educational opportunities and outcomes and so forth. And that goes hand in glove with this dispersal idea in my other map, by being in schools, by being in public housing projects, of which some of those dots were, and in being in these other places, food pantries, that this is the way that even without just going to lobby for policies, how individual psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, clinicians can put their work closer to these connections through those kinds of shared relationships and roles, by having our work reach up these chains, these causal chains. And in fact, the field of social determinants of mental health, which I think is gaining ground and fluency in our profession, is really jumping off point to bring a community of interest across the mental health profession to see that it is how much it has to contribute, not just to individual morbidity, but to this larger issue of well-being, of collective social cohesion, collective efficacy, and thus filling in that other part, collective action, doing local problem solving in my circle of the social climate. Also, it also brings us, mental health folks, in terms of thinking about how are we part of other people's outcomes. In line, not just, I'm sorry?
I'm just signaling that we have about 5 minutes left for that first half hour.
Right. Into a conversation about how economic change needs to happen. This is a summary of this idea of donut economics, which some of you may be thinking about instead of a sense of the economics being this trajectory of growth upwards, is we have to live within a donut. We need to live within a circle which has a social foundation, which is essentially the same as that social climate loop, that doesn't go beyond, that is designed and engineered so it doesn't go beyond an ecological ceiling of sustainability. And that social foundation includes a lot of things that show how emotional resilience and well-being and how we fit into other people's outcomes is a core foundation. That idea, that intermixing of what we know with the social purposes to survive in the future is becoming more, there's a consilience, a confluence of attention and literacy around that issue in fields of economics and fields of sustainable development and so forth. And so we should be energetic partners with those folks and see ourselves as knowing hugely important things to contribute to them. And two works that I recommend to you that really itemize, in particular, Tony Biglin really, and in this, if you don't read his book, this is his one paper that is an exhaustive itemization of what the sciences of prevention science and of early intervention and population level mental health and all that we know that actually are the things we can individually do, systemically advocate for, such as what all school systems should do, and the kind of economic changes that we need that drive that circle that I described, that have a nurture effect, that really change us from into an emotionally resilient place from a damaged place. Sally Weintraub really focuses less on itemizing this very clear to-do list of actionable things and knowledge bases that we can build on to bring what we have to these other discussions and goals. But she also just really talks about and kind of underscores the necessity of getting to a caring culture of social norms that is at the end of this. We can work on individual morbidity at different ways by dispersing our work. We can partner with other efforts around overall well-being and collective efficacy by extending that work. But we also bring knowledge about the necessity of a caring culture, but the fact that that needs norms to thrive. It needs these tools and methods, but those tools and methods are also about a fight over norms, over changing our social norms to ones of care. And we should be in that fight through these other layers of ways we can act, but with that as our ultimate aim and purpose, and to really think about how each of what we do and the policies we fight for and the way we engage the culture at large is to shout out that message that our social norms have to change to care if that virtuous cycle of the social climate is going to work. And I'll close with two quotes that underscore that vision. Ruth Shim and Michael Compton, who have really, literally written the book about the social determinants of mental health. They had a brief paper in the American Journal of Psychiatry where they say this, in addition to reforming public policies, we have to change social norms. The two are intimately related. And I think that the other kinds of levels of work that we can do will work if we keep that end in mind, that we need to see ourselves as part of changing social norms. The phrase social norms occurred 12 times in this 2-page commentary. And then finally, the advocate Adrienne Marie Brown, who I've learned a lot from, and her book Emerging Strategies takes biomimicry to a new step of thinking about the social very differently. But she writes, we live in a world which others imagined. Most of the constructs that oppress us feel like a fact, are taught to us as a fact, but they're actually evidence of historical imagination. They were imagined before they became practiced into solidity, authority, tradition, and oppression. And they are not the most beautiful things imagined in human history, but the most violently upheld. So we are in an imagination battle. And the future of the earth is in an imagination battle that we can imagine and put to the ground, whether it's like the maps I showed you, what a caring society looks like, but also the steps and tools to get there. And that is our battle that we are fit for as a profession, that we have expertise and credibility to pursue, and that we should engage. Thanks.
Gary, thank you so much. That was really rich, challenging, mind-opening, actually. I had a look at Gary's slides yesterday for a minute, and they're pretty complicated, but now really quite comprehensible. And it's really just the kind of the radical nature of that kind of reconceptualization that is sort of striking. But also, it seems like it puts into doable terms some of the ideals and aspirations that I think many of us have had in our day-to-day work prior to or independently of the immediate concerns that we're talking about today when we think about climate. Social justice has been a concern for many of us before we were thinking so extensively about climate justice. Folks, it's just about 10 o'clock. We had in mind to do Mary Beth's section right now, but I think in the interest of pacing things and one other item, it'll be better for us to take a break right now for about 5 minutes. And that other item is that we just were asked to accommodate another group in the space that we're in right now. So for both purposes, let's take a 5-minute break now, and then we'll pick it up again with you, Mary Beth, when we come back in a few, okay? Feel free to stand up, take a breath. We won't ask Mark Dixon to lead us in a collective meditation, but we can do a little personal reflection, some deep breathing, or whatever's a good mental stretch for you.